Shalom, family, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's weekly news updates. It's always a pleasure and a privilege when we get together for these weekly updates, and always thankful for those of you that join with us, share the links, and encourage our brothers and sisters. It's always nice to see everyone, and it's always nice to get the broadcasts off on time. Isn't that something? Wow, we actually managed to do that today. No technical difficulty. See, we can actually do it when we're not interfered with. Isn't that wonderful? Right? Exactly when we're supposed to. Wonderful, wonderful thing. I tell you what, I needed that today because I tell you, we've had warfare in just about every other area. I don't know about the rest of you out there, but man, the battles seem to be intensifying out there in the world, and we're certainly seeing evidence of increasing warfare. And many of you are sharing testimonies and talking about just some of the spiritual battles that you're finding yourself in, a little bit different than we are accustomed to and what we are used to seeing in the past, right? We are more accustomed to a little bit lighter warfare, and all of a sudden it's stepped up another level. Some of you have commented about that, so certainly appreciate your comments in the discussion today, because I think we're going to be touching on quite a bit that has to do with war. Speaking of which, we do have, of course, for those of you watching and joining us for the first time, we do have a wonderful website at remnantwatch.com. That's remnantwatch.com, where we keep an eye on those things that are going on around the world, and that's our job. The scripture tells us that we are to keep watch. And one of the things that we found was doing it every single day. That was a little overwhelming. Some people were getting it by the hour, by the minute almost. You were getting updates, and that makes you filled with anxiety. So that was too much. And then we found those that were not connected at all, and that's a little too disconnected. So we came up with this weekly news update pace, and if you click here, it always takes you to the latest update here at remnantwatch.com. And we always have these handy guides here for survival and getting through difficult times, because, again, you never know when those things are going to happen, and they don't announce themselves, do they, folks? All of a sudden there's flooding in Hawaii. All of a sudden there's fires in the Midwest. All of a sudden there's tornadoes or hurricanes or things like that that just happen. And so it's always wise to be prepared and to be ahead. You know, after all, better to be prepared and not need it than need it and not have it, right? So that makes good sense. So we're trying to always encourage all of you to be prepared, be wise. And it is looking like it is going to be one of those time periods when you're really going to want to be not only connected with your brothers and sisters, but thinking ahead, guys, thinking a little wiser than the hand-to-mouth, just survival thinking that a lot of people are stuck in. And it's going to take a little discipline, but I believe this next season is going to be just that. We're going to have to figure out how to do things in a more united way. We're going to have to learn how to work together in ways that maybe we hadn't really considered up until this point. So certainly something new on the horizon for all of us. And how many know that with the amount of warfare, the amount of things that are going on, conflicts going on around the world, lots of people, millions of people are experiencing massive disruption to what is the status quo or normal life in their world. So don't be so surprised if you experience the same things as we go forward. And now, on that note, let's get into the news. And tonight's top story, we're seeing a lot of evidence that the Trump administration is in fact talking about doing a ground war. And even though they're the Iranians are saying, yeah, well, go ahead and bring it, this does not bode well for America. And so it is a very, very dangerous thing indeed. Trump administration is making heavy preparations for the potential use of ground troops in Iran. So those of you that have been paying attention, you know that, again, so all kinds of advice, and certainly this channel was one of those advising against any conflict like this. Lo and behold, here we are, and now we're talking about this kind of potential. I think this is a very dangerous moment, of course. Pentagon officials have made detailed preparations for the deploying of U.S. ground troops in Iran. Multiple sources briefed on the discussions told CBS News, and senior military commanders have submitted specific requests aimed at preparing for such an option as President Trump weighs moves in the U.S.-led conflict with Iran, sources have said. So we're now seeing a greater interest in trying to figure out a way to get more leverage I don't believe that is a wise move. And I, in fact, think that at this point, that is less likely to happen than it was maybe even a week ago. Because of the developments that we've seen and the battle readiness of the Iranians. I think thinking you can just go over there and just take over a country like that is beyond foolhardy. They are, I think it was highly underestimated, the potential threat that this regime was, and it certainly did not collapse. So thoughts that by simply providing support that the Iranian people would do the work, well, that did not work out. And so now there's a lot of pushback, and when you gamble like that, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And right now, what's being reported is that Trump backed down. Iranian media is denying direct talks after the U.S. holds off energy strikes. And of course, basically, they're afraid of Iran's response. They backed down from his 48-hour ultimatum, and that's something that we'll talk about here in a moment. And it's terrible diplomacy what we're seeing. It's absolutely horrible diplomacy that we've watched the Trump administration attempt to a sort of, I bully is no other word that I can think of, and yet without the military superiority that I think the United States once thought it had, and is now finding out it's not quite there. Unless they're going to bring out really, really big weapons, this fight looks a lot less one-sided than I think they were planning. And again, of course, the Iranians continue to send missiles. Iran fires missiles at Israel after warning Trump they have special plans for you tonight, after the U.S. president threatened to attack on power plants before touting a deal with the Ayatollah. So nobody's really sure what's going on here, because you keep getting mixed signals coming out of either the White House or Iran or Israel or Europe. So it continues to be a very dangerous and scary moment. And meanwhile, Iran continues to strike near Israel's nuclear research center as Trump threatens attacks on their Iranian power plant. So they're not backing down at all. They continue to lay into the Israeli infrastructure. And Iranian missiles struck 2 communities in southern Israel late Saturday, showing, by the way, their range. So if they wanted to hit Jerusalem, they could, because they hit further. So this, just to put that into perspective, and leaving buildings shattered and dozens injured in dual attacks not far from Israel's main nuclear center, while President Donald Trump warned the U.S. will obliterate Iranian power plants if it doesn't fully open the Straits of Hormuz within 48 hours. So gave them a dangerous ultimatum. And this is, of course, just adding even more consternation, adding more fuel to the fire, and making, I believe, the entire situation just that much more dangerous. And folks, lives are at stake here, right? So this is what makes this crazy, is that we're these angry politicians get into a fight, and who pays for it? Well, when men fight, usually it's women and children who pay for it, right? So that's usually what happens. And of course, Iran is taking advantage of this high ground to reposition itself in the region, and of course, enjoying a tremendous amount of positive goodwill among the Arab and Muslim communities, because of its standing up to the imperial West, and that, of course, is boding well. So Iran is calling for a regional coordination and calls with Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. And they're starting to have a little bit of sway. Iran's foreign minister called for vigilance and regional coordination and separate calls with counterparts in Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. And this is, of course, starting to really, really rock the region, as military warned of tougher response to any further attacks on its energy infrastructure, state media reports on Thursday. So on the one hand, Iran is saying, look, you partner with these guys, and your places and your buildings and your things are open game. But we need to come together, because these are the ones disturbing our region. So you're seeing a lot of mixed messaging, because there's 2 different efforts going on. There's one effort to really come against hard the Western, what they perceive to be imperial forces, and at the same time trying to gather or garner support among the Arab people, among the Muslim community, to stand united against such things. So this is really becoming quite an interesting dichotomy and quite an interesting scenario as it unfolds. And we knew it would be. And in comes, of course, the Russians, and in come the Chinese to take full advantage of these vacuums of power and opportunity. And then, of course, the United States is trying to fund this thing. And where's it going to get the money for this? It needs, the Pentagon is now asking for $200 billion more dollars for a war nobody wants and nobody thinks we should have done. $200 billion. And who knows how many lives will get lost because of this war as a result of this kind of thing. We don't know. Why? Well, because they're not going to really tell you how many people died. Hegseth says Pentagon is asking Congress for money, and it takes money to kill bad guys. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the Pentagon is asking Congress for more money to cover the Iran war. And so we're not finding that the least bit surprising, are we, guys? That there's certainly people with their hands out, and they're certainly going to get paid in a time of war. Entire economies rise and fall based on war. So we're not surprised by any of that. Okay. We're not surprised by any of the actions that are going on, because we're starting to look around and say, is this a bunch of theatrics just so he can sell some equipment? It's certainly looking that way. In the Straits of Hormuz, Trump is launching an offensive to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this, of course, is the area right outside of Iran. So you're asking for trouble. And Israel hints ground invasion is imminent as oil prices skyrocket. So, of course, this version of Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm not sure what we're looking at here, folks. I honestly do not know. President Donald Trump has launched an offensive to reopen the Straits of Hormuz as Israel hints at a ground invasion is imminent. And I don't know that, again, that is going to be a wise move. I don't know that you're going to get success. And, of course, here are the Straits of Hormuz. This is the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. And, of course, right here is where they're having to go right by Iran. So, as you can see, they got to go right into their neighborhood to take oil out of there. And, of course, 20 to 21 million barrels of petroleum liquids pass through there daily to supply the rest of the world. So that's a big deal to not have access to the Straits of Hormuz, folks. That's a huge problem going forward. So that is, of course, what's causing the consternation in the world as they're looking at this situation. And that's why Iran said, hey, if you're willing to do business with the Chinese yuan, then hey, they'll do business with you. So that was the new deal, is they began to attack the U.S. dollar. It's behind a paywall. Fortunately, I can't show you that story. But they started to attack the U.S. dollar with the idea that, of course, this would start to fracture the West. And guess what? It worked. So it's really starting to become a desperate situation in the Middle East. And now realizing that if they do go in on a ground offensive against Iran, that they might be putting their own forces behind an enemy line, making the U.S. forces be in between enemy forces. So right now, U.S. is encouraging Syria to assist with the disarming of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which would be just south of this offensive if they were going to do so. And of course, turning the Middle East into an absolute war zone. I mean, from one side to the other. And we're talking ground troops. What could go wrong, folks? We're talking a river of blood if that happens. And so nothing good will come of that. It will be destructive. Lots of people will die, and they'll end up back at a table, which they could just do now and skip all the people dying. You know how I feel about it, right? So you guys can pick up my opinion. Yeah, I'm really being subtle, I'm sure. Okay, and so now, since our last report, the U.S. is dropping 5,000-pound bunker bombs on underground missile sites near the Straits of Hormuz. So they're going at this. This was actually last week, right at the time that we did our last report. They were doing these. So not sure if they're still using these bunker busters or what they're doing right now, but I can tell you right now that the situation is very, very fluid, as the Russians and the Chinese are coming in very heavy to support Iran. And again, supporting what they believe is the rule of law, because they feel that the United States has become a bit rogue, operating without a coalition of nations. Now, many of you that are older remember the boring speeches and the terrible news broadcasts we had to endure of George Bush talking about a coalition of nations to bring about the rule of law, because we've got to operate with the rule of law. And, he did so much of that it was difficult to build momentum against the Iraq war, because they had the high ground. They had the moral high ground. They don't have that now. They look like bullies. So there's no way to pretty that up. I mean, it just looks the way it looks, You can defend it if you want to, but it looks the way it looks to the world. Very different scenario. And so as a result, guess what? Can't very well marshal the same kinds of support that you did see in the Gulf War in the early 1990s and so forth. So why is that? Well, because you don't have the high ground. And then they got everybody convinced that going to war in the Middle East was somehow, some way connected to 9/11, which was another one of those for entertainment purposes only crazy moments. But nevertheless, that's what we found. And so that has, I think, been the gaslighting that we've all been under. And now we're really asking new questions. Why did we even get ourselves into this conflict? Who really benefits? What was the upside? Who calculated the potential damage? I think the Israeli people are right now wondering whether or not this was a good idea or not. And it may very well be that Iran would have eventually attacked, who knows? But certainly was accelerated by attacking them. So there's a lot of people that are really asking new questions at this moment in Iranian intelligence. A minister was killed in precise airstrikes by U.S. military targets, missile sites. And so they continue to execute strikes in and around Iran, and in basically declaring, the president thinking he's declaring that Israel is out of danger. I haven't seen any evidence that Israel's out of any danger. Every single night, I have seen new footage from the Middle East and from Israel that somehow is making it out of there. I don't know how, because I know it's not legal for it to be out there. And it's nevertheless being shown to the world that devastation and more missiles and more things are falling. So I don't think this is going anywhere near the way that they're painting it. We won't know. I don't think we're going to know the truth for a minute, because I think that's the plan, is to keep the West ignorant as long as possible. So what's new about that? Anybody think that's a new thing? That's nothing new. And so Saudi Arabia is now warning that if this continues, we're going to see oil prices that are going to spike past $180 a barrel. And to give you an idea where we're at now, we're at, $100 to $120 a barrel. And you can see what it does to gas prices. So you can imagine what $180 a barrel would do. And who gets rich in that situation? Well, the oil guys do, right? Guys been sitting on oil. All right. So Saudi Arabia warns oil prices could spike past $100, $180 a barrel. And of course, it basically continues to put pressure. Brent crude reached $103 on Friday. This, by the way, really helps the Russians, helps, a lot of countries that sell oil. So, there's upside and downside. And folks, when the market went sideways, a lot of people benefited. And people's demand for the oil didn't drop. So now you got less places. And if they knock out a couple more of these oil refineries and places for oil supply, you're going to see mass loss of life in the world. So this is a very dangerous time for us all. And I do pray that everyone take it seriously and begin to really intercede for those in harm's way and going to be affected by the things that are happening right now in the earth. The site of the crucifixion, so something that turned out to be quite prophetic, the site of the crucifixion was shut down. Here, let's see if I can get this pop-up out of the way before I switch this. Nope, they're going to insist we look at this silly pop-up. But I thought this was very fascinating as a story. Hang on, I got to turn this fan off. And it was very, very interesting because it's the place where, of course, the crucifixion occurred, and it is considered a kadosh place in Israel. And for the first time, it was shut. Now, that doesn't happen, folks. Okay? That doesn't happen. But notice the date on the Zadok Enoch priestly calendar, which we keep, that this report came in right on the new year. Okay? So it was shut on the new year, according to the calendar of the priests who kept the temple before the invasion a couple hundred years before Mashiach. So this is a very interesting date for this event. And I'm sure many of you are going to find it as fascinating as I did. Just, what was going on here? and what does it mean spiritually that we now had that shutting down? What does that say? Some of you with a prophetic sight may be able to read into that. I have my own ideas of what it is saying. And certainly Israel and what it is happening there is very interesting for Bible prophecy, of course, for all of us watching and those of you praying for those in harm's way. I know that it's reported that I heard up to a third of the population has already left Israel and are no longer in that place at this time. So it's interesting to see how many remain and what is the fate that we watch unfold. Speaking of which, the conflict is not staying. As we told you, it would not stay in the Middle East. It's going to travel. And drones are over bases where Marco Rubio and Henseth were at for, and of course, it's raised a lot of concern. U.S. officials detected unidentified drones above the Washington Army base where Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth live. According to 3 people briefed on the situation, officials have not determined where they came from. 2 of the people said the military is monitoring potential threats. And this is not a new story. Remember that, guys. We talked about these drones and these unidentified flying objects, for lack of a better term, that were all around military bases. And we talked about that several times in the last year, and that they could not identify them. And in fact, when Trump was transitioning from the president-elect to president, he was kind of poking fun at that. Remember that? He was poking fun, we're going to find out what that is. And then they never said anything. They never cleared it up. And so we still don't really know. And apparently they don't have any power over these things as well. So we're starting to see multiple reports now. This one's out of ABC News that multiple waves of unauthorized drones are spotted over strategic U.S. Air Force bases. And your guess is as good as mine what these may be. A drone sighting that temporarily raised alarms at one of the United States Air Force largest and most strategic airfields earlier this month was more extensive and potentially more dangerous than first reported, according to a confidential internal briefing document reviewed by ABC News. And Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana said it was under a shelter-in-place order after March 9th, after a report of unmanned aerial systems operating over the installation. So we're definitely in new territory. And I think this is causing some serious concern because when you go to war, you find out your enemy's secret weapons, and they may have weapons you didn't know about, right? So there's a lot of people concerned about it. And I think that's why the Americans are thinking again about whether or not this is a good idea. And yeah, you're going to keep seeing more of this. Today, he's announcing, I'd like to announce we have a good deal. And Trump's saying, yes, we'll leave Iran operations very near future. Why? He wants to get out of this. He wants out of this. He told reporters on Tuesday that the United States is not ready to leave military operations yet, but that we'll be leaving in pretty much the very near future. In other words, I want to keep the pressure on because I want to come out with something good on my face, but We want to get the heck out of here because this is not going the way we planned. And I'm telling you that right now. Okay? This is blowing up literally in our faces. And we've got hostages already that we've got to negotiate with because I already saw footage of U.S. soldiers under Iranian custody. So this has already gone bad. Already. And now Iran is continuing to threaten U.S. Bases with long-range missiles, and that has just come as of yesterday. So Iran is reportedly target U.S. bases with those missiles, and they fired 2 intermediate long-range ballistic missiles toward Diego Garcia, which prove their range is greater than people thought, and it actually hit Diego Garcia. And it's a critical launch point for U.S. bombers. So to have that be inside a missile range really change the game. And of course, now the Israeli military, as well as others, are starting to take note. I think we underestimated Iran, plain and simple. And I also think that we underestimated their partnership with China and Russia. And China and Russia certainly have extended range and have no problem hitting U.S. targets. I think, you also have China and Russia licking their chops because the U.S. is looking highly vulnerable right now. It's one thing to take on one country. It's another thing to take on multiple countries. And now Iran is vowing to destroy Middle East water, okay, and energy facilities if the U.S. attacks power plants. So they've got a counter move. They're saying you do that and we're going to take out the water all over. Tehran's response to Trump's threat signals a potentially dangerous escalation as both sides menace sites relied on by millions of people. See this? It's got nothing to do with they got to stop this because it's going to affect people that have nothing to do with this conflict. And this is the part that really gets to me is millions of people whose lives are in the balance depending upon these hotheads. Tehran has said it would irreversibly destroy essential infrastructure across the Middle East, including vital water systems, if the U.S. follows through on Donald Trump's threat to obliterate Iran's power plants once the Straits of Hormuz is fully open within 2 days. As Iranian missiles struck 2 southern Israeli cities overnight, injuring dozens of people, and Tehran deployed long-range missiles for the first time, the development signaled a dangerous potential escalation of the war, now in its 4th week, and both sides threatening facilities relied on by millions of people, innocent civilians, now going to be affected by this stupidity. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said on Sunday that vital infrastructures in the region, including energy and desalination facilities, would be considered a legitimate target and would be irreversibly destroyed if this country's own infrastructure was attacked. So you can attack and you will get away with it, but do so at your peril because the response will be catastrophic. And I think this is finally, hopefully, reaching a point where they're going to start negotiating. And look what's going on here. Putin is offering to stop sharing intel with Iran if the U.S. cuts off Ukraine. So quit helping Ukraine and we won't help Iran. Oh, who saw that coming? Anybody? Anybody saw that coming? You stop helping them, we'll stop helping them. The U.S. rejects the Russian proposal, which has nevertheless sparked concerns in Europe amid growing transatlantic tensions. The Moscow proposed a quid pro quo to the U.S. under which the Kremlin would stop sharing intelligence information with Iran, such as the precise coordinates of U.S. military assets in the Middle East, if Washington ceased supplying Ukraine with intel about Russia. 2 people familiar with the U.S.-Russia negotiations said that such a proposal was made by Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev to Trump administrative envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner during their meetings last week in Miami. The U.S. rejected the proposal, people added. They, like all other officials cited in the article, were granted anonymity due to the sensitivity of the discussions, meaning we don't know what in the world is true and how much of this is theatrics. I'll tell you something that isn't theatrics, my friends, and that's that Cuba is now without power, and this continues to happen. They are continuing to have problems with the island's power grid as Cuba's power grid collapses, leaving it without electricity for the third time this month. And this is not going well for the Cuban government and Cuban people. Cuba's power grid collapsed Saturday, leaving the country without electricity for a third time in March as the communist government battles with a decaying infrastructure and a U.S. imposed oil blockade. And Cuban Electric Union, which reports to the Ministry of Energy and Mines, announced a total blackout across the island without initially giving a cause for the problem. So obviously they are in need of support. And this is part of the challenge that the Russians are now trying to get involved in. And of course, the Cubans are preparing for military aggression from the United States, as they put it. And Cuba's deputy of foreign ministry says its military is preparing for possible aggression from the U.S. And based on some of the comments made by our current president, it's a reasonable thing to be thinking about. And so again, like I said, this power grid issue continues to plague that island, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem, even if they were to get the oil from Russia that they're trying to get. Excuse me, Russia was trying to send them oil, and it'll probably even get there. I'm sure it'll be part of some kind of negotiations, but nevertheless, they need a new program because the answer can't be Russian tankers. So there's a lot of rhetoric now concerning the Christian versus the Muslim conflict that was prophesied in the 1800s by Mr. Albert Pike, if y'all remember. So now there's discussion about whether Pete Hegseth, Christian's rhetoric, is drawing renewed scrutiny. The U.S. goes to war with Iran. Is that just fulfilling an ancient prophecy? Those people that are following closely these kinds of things certainly think so. I don't know what you guys think, but it certainly becomes a very interesting story. This is becoming Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has found no shortage of ways to bring his strand of conservative evangelicalism into the Pentagon. He hosts monthly Christian worship services for his employees. His department's promotional videos have displayed Bible verses alongside military footage. So again, futurism and religious connotation are used in this conflict. And this is going on both sides. So this is a very, very dangerous thing, because once you start motivating people with this level of fervor, you can get some very crazy behavior. So again, all based in a certain point of view, right? Because of that, they're now ready to go do all kinds of things they otherwise wouldn't even consider. So there's that. And of course, there's concern inside the United States. Many of you would do well to take heed that U.S. is issuing a worldwide security alert urging caution as Iran-linked groups may target American interests. And this makes sense, folks, because after all, the U.S. military is targeting Iranian interests. And so the tit for tat is usually in the mind of, well, not so smart people. The U.S. Department of State issued a worldwide security alert Sunday, urging Americans across the globe to be wary of threats from Iran-linked groups. Very wise. Be sober out there, folks. The Department of State advises Americans worldwide, and especially in the Middle East, to exercise increased caution. Americans abroad should follow the guidance of security alerts issued by the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. And right now is a dangerous time if you're an American to travel, especially outside of the United States in areas where the political climate may be shifting. And this is often when people are victimized by association. So again, be careful, especially if you're traveling through difficult regions. And there's a lot of warnings going on that the economic impact and the worldwide impact will be more devastating than any war weapon ever could be. In fact, the war warnings that are coming out now is that if this war doesn't end soon, the world will be in the grip of an economic catastrophe on a scale we've never seen before. And this is what Britain and its peoples must do now to protect their homes and lives. And there's a lot of people that are really preparing This story is, of course, behind some kind of paywall, but they're really preparing for food shortages and having to endure a different type of lifestyle, because I don't know that you're going to be able to maintain independent homes. And all the things that we've grown accustomed to may be changing very rapidly, much more rapidly than people are willing to change, to adjust. So usually when things like this occur, historically, the reason why people are so heavily damaged is because they don't adjust their lifestyle quickly enough. They keep trying to maintain a lifestyle that's not sustainable in a difficult time. So instead of modifying their lifestyle, modifying their living arrangements to change accordingly, they keep trying to maintain a previous era's status quo. That's usually where the devastation occurs. Remember, dramatic change can be very devastating. Economically, up or down, can cost lives. And so right now, it's very good that we're seeing Trump ordering the War Department to postpone strikes on Iranian sites and energy sites. That's good. He's citing productive talks to end the war. So trying to put a good color on it, trying to make it look like, hey, the Iranians, they want to come and talk. We're gonna work this out. I'm pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last few days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue through the week, I've instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. So we're now in a new holding pattern where we're going to watch and see if, in fact, they can work out some of these things. But how many know that it's looking very manipulative to me? And of course, it didn't have anything to do with, of course, the firing of missiles to Israel. And even after the warning, they have special plans for you tonight after the U.S. president threatened attack on power plants before touting a deal with the Ayatollah. And so, again, we've already seen a lot of bloodshed and a lot of loss of life. We really don't need to see any more. Iran has launched missiles at Israel after it ominously warned Donald Trump, and it has special plans for him and U.S. allies in the Gulf following the American president's threat to attack the nation's power plants. And so even the thought that it would still be a potential threat has got them very upset, and reasonably so. After all, again, we've already discussed that millions of people would be affected by such an event. So if the United States does, in fact, attack Iran again, and now we're all watching this, right? And so he's saying they're talking and they have a deal, and now attacks occur. He loses the high ground again. So now this is going to be a little bit different scenario. And of course, the International Energy Association, or whatever that is, the EAI or IEA rather, on Friday issued advice to consumers concerning their energy uses, because of course, I'm telling people basically work from home, drive slower, and don't use gas cookers. Basically, oil prices are going to continue to surge, and we're going to see more and more difficulty coming up. These are just warning shots that you all should pay attention to, that are indicating to you, those of you pattern watchers, that they're laying a narrative for not only higher prices, but energy controls. So energy controls are a little bit more than just high prices. Then they start controlling, even if you have the money, even access. So this gets very heavy-handed, and it doesn't matter where you are. Now, speaking of not mattering where you are, Iran missiles explode over Jerusalem, and debris falls close to holy sites. So there was potential damage in Israel. Missile fragments from an Iranian missile fell just across Jerusalem's old city on Monday after a missile exploded overhead, Israeli officials said, landing near some of the world's most sensitive religious sites. So they seem to be avoiding Jerusalem for the most part right now, and which a lot of people are very grateful for. So Jerusalem is at the moment not been itself under siege, although Tel Aviv's a whole different story. Tel Aviv is not being spared. It looks like it's getting hit left and right. And oil did briefly come back down. So the notion that there may be um, some movement in oil and movement along the way, well, then oil prices started to react to that. So Brent briefly touched 119 as Netanyahu says Israel's hoping to open the Straits of Hormuz, which means this is just going to keep being a bit of a battleground. Oil and gas prices jump after Iranian strikes damage Qatar's key LNG export facility. And this is really important because Qatar really supplies a lot more than just fuel. We're also talking about fertilizer, folks. There's a lot of things that can be dramatically affected by this. Okay, so what are we expecting to see? Well, again, the warnings are coming out that food rationing, panic buying, planes grounded, and an economic hammer blow, far worse than COVID, is potentially on its way. And I would say definitely on its way. I don't think it's potential. Economists are explaining a nightmare scenario that could just be weeks away due to the Iran war, and that's a fact. So this summer could be very difficult, and going into the fall could be even worse. Fears are mounting that the world is headed for an economic blow far worse than the COVID pandemic within weeks as the Iran conflict threatens global oil and gas supplies. Experts warn it could trigger food shortages, grounded flights, and panic buying as countries risk running out of fuel and energy and key shipping routes remain shut. So this is going to start having a ripple effect if they don't get together, talk it out, and get rid of this stuff quick. So the pressure is definitely on to, sort of get rid of the problem and move on. And as I said, Russia is sending 2 shipments of Russian oil and gas. They're headed to Cuba in defiance of the U.S. So this is a potential conflict looking for a place to happen. It looks like it's going to happen just south of Florida. So first cargo on course to arrive today as Donald Trump taunts communist island with administration engaged in talks. Well, it's not a very good idea to do that. And of course, that's certainly not going to be lending to the strengthening of relations between us. So this is crazy. In the meanwhile, in the United States, we're experiencing a flat economy. And that will happen when millions of people have died and they don't want to talk about it. Funny thing happens when millions of people die. They don't buy things. When they don't buy things, it starts to ripple. If these geniuses really wanted to hide what they were doing, they don't just need bots. They need bots with wallets. They need bots that buy things. They need bots that actually do transactions and actually spend Fed money. Maybe then that would work, because otherwise we've got a problem. Job creation is near zero. Fed sees unemployment holding at 4.4 amid low labor force growth driven by immigration declines and lower participation rates, folks. Job creation in the U.S. has slowed to essentially zero. And that, again, is because you got too many dying people. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said Wednesday as the Fed released its latest economic projections, which included slightly higher economic growth than previously projected and little change to the unemployment rate. Okay, so basically flatlining the country. And that's going to continue because we are moving from an analog to a digital economy, kind of like McDonald's moving from, people to robots. It's happening whether you like it or not. And if you don't get on board, you become a statistic. So the people that are figuring out, like, I don't like it, but I got to do it, they're figuring it out. And it's reality. We can't stop it all. So a lot of things are happening that are changing the economy, changing the way that we do business, changing the way that we function, folks. We've got to adapt to this world. Speaking of adapting, people in the Midwest, somebody posted this on Facebook and somebody thought the pictures were AI. I can assure you this is not AI. At least one dead as Nebraska wildfires are scorching nearly 800,000 acres. The governor, Jim Pillen, said firefighters are aiming at a corner as they battle 4 blazes across the state. This is in Nebraska with progress made earlier this week. This is not, I don't know where somebody got the idea this was manufactured. This is really happening across the state of Kansas. There are fires everywhere. You can see the scorched land. Red flag warnings, meaning increased fire risk for much of the region, are forecast to return 10 a.m. And we've seen strong winds that have contributed to this lack of containment. So as of the last time I checked, they had 0% containment. This is an absolute disaster burning through the America's heartland in a time when we're already going to be stressed for food production. And what could go wrong, folks? So you're seeing what's going on here. A lot of things are starting to sort of converge at the same time. Coincidental? Well, you let me know. Meanwhile, you see President Trump is deploying ICE, his immigration workers, to airports on Monday to ease crowded TSA lines. Now, how does this ease crowded TSA lines? I don't know, but if I were an illegal immigrant, I probably wouldn't be going to the airport. So maybe that's the plan. They scared away half the crowd, maybe? I don't know. I'm not really sure how that helps. I was really looking at the story going, well, I don't know if you guys are going to help or you're going to end up being a distraction, more of a problem. Not really sure that that's beneficial, but we'll watch and see. Meanwhile, the FBI is buying data to track everybody. Who's surprised? Wipe that surprised look off your face and quit acting as if you didn't know that. This is the first confirmation that the FBI has resumed actively buying people's data for investigations. Well, it's nothing new. This is something that they've been doing for quite some time. In fact, businesses do it all the time. They go to companies that are, traffic companies, and they can find out all kinds of things about you. And so that's basically what you're looking at here when you're looking at these situations. So, folks, this is reality. This is where we are at this time in our world. We are in a time period where you've been commoditized. I don't know. You've been made into a commodity. It's real. And it's happening every single day. As a matter of fact, we saw this story where McDonald's is testing, get rid of this cover. McDonald's is testing humanoid robots in front of the right there in front of everybody. Hello, I'm a humanoid robot. I'm going to take your order. Hello. Sorry. Hello. We're going to take your McDonald's over. McDonald's in the Chinese megacity of Shanghai is testing humanoid robots in roles usually to preserve the human workers. And other types of robots also let loose inside the restaurant to greet and entertain diners. How about that? Okay. And, they're not particularly advanced. They're not that great. They don't have to be, guys. That's just it. It doesn't require that much. So people are like, well, it's not that sophisticated. It doesn't have to be. Okay? It doesn't have to be. And a lot of people are finding out that it doesn't take much to replace certain jobs. Here's something that I think is interesting. I don't know who's running the airports, but we got some problems there because now we got planes. 2 pilots are dead. 41 people are hospitalized after an Air Canada flight. Sorry about this pop-up. Just suddenly jumped there. This Air Canada flight, a plane hits a fire truck. I've never even heard of this. I said to Mindy, I've said, have you ever heard of a plane hitting a fire truck when trying to land? I mean, this is who's running these airports? This is Laurel and Hardy time here. Air Canada plane hits fire truck when landing at LaGuardia, causing airport closure. Wow, look at this, folks. I mean, this is an Air Canada flight taxiing on a runway, hitting a fire truck. We can't keep them from hitting each other on the ground? Ooh. Houston, we've got some problems. America is falling apart left and right. How many are feeling it right now? You're thinking, my goodness, what's going on? What happened to my America? What happened? Is kind of crazy. By the way, the Earth is responding, and we always make note of these events. The West Coast waters are experiencing another large marine heat wave, and we pay attention to these things. It was actually earlier this month, but it got by us, so we thought we'd mention it. Massive marine heat wave has dominated the waters off the West Coast last summer. So this marks only the 3rd time in record that such a large section of the coastal ocean has remained so warm for so long. So now this not only is going to mean a potential die-off, but this also has a portents for the weather, for the El Nino effect. How many remember that? So we may be seeing more unusual amounts of rain than we normally have. So that would actually be a good thing in certain parts of the country, but nevertheless, it's still very, very potentially a very dangerous situation in certain parts. We've already gotten a lot of rain. And how about some of these stories? I'm going to close out with some of this going on in our schools. And again, guys, I continue to warn about these things because it keeps coming up. I wish I didn't have these. I wish I didn't have pop-ups. My goodness, every story I've got a battle of pop-ups. There you go, the battle of pop-ups. Okay. A Colorado school secretary is admitted to, yes, with a boy, 13, multiple times. And now she's on the run. Have you seen this? This is the mental decay that we continue to document, especially around our children. And this is why we keep pointing at it, because what we believe it's our responsibility to say, folks, it's really not a good idea to take your eye off your children in this hour, especially for long periods of time. Colorado middle school secretary is on the lam after authorities say she abused 13-year-old student for months, even plying the boy with booze and weed during their predatory sessions at a park in a Walmart parking lot. So it seems this continues to come out in the news and continue to plague our nation. So please do not take these things lightly. There was another story right at the top. I'll bring that one out as well. This was in Ohio. And another teacher. And again, the female abusers have been certainly coming up strong. This used to be a male-dominated stupidity, and now it has crossed the gender line. And I'm not even kidding. I don't even know what to make of some of this, especially where we come from. Those of you that are my generation, and we're looking at this, going, "You got to be kidding! This is how many stories? If you saw 2 a year, we got 2 just this report. Look at this: a 28-year-old charged with carrying out twisted relationship with a student. Okay, and a disgraced Ohio school teacher copped a twisted months-long relationship, and now is pleading guilty to gross sexual imposition and so forth. So we're seeing yet again another situation where these lines are being crossed. It's a 10th grader, okay? And so, folks, this is why we bring these things up, because we know that we are in a time period that is highly predatory. It's a time period that we believe it's very important for us to be sober and vigilant. And given the hyper-religious futurism that has been pumped into the air, there's a high likelihood that we're going to see a much crazier year coming up. So preparing, being wise, getting ahead of that, anticipating the potential for devolution, especially societal devolution, it's just wise. It just makes a lot of sense. It's one of those things where you're better to be prepared and not need it than need it and not have it. So I think we're going to be seeing some really tough times. That's it for today. I've run out. I don't have any more energy for some of you are like, man, the news is getting crazy. I know it is. And I'm so thankful to all of you who hang with us. We didn't do the Apostles at the Gate this morning. Our brother contacted us. I should have updated everyone, but I apologize for that. Got very, very busy right away. But we're going to be resuming those after the Passover holiday. And so looking forward to celebrating Passover together with fellowships, and certainly want to encourage all of you to take advantage of this moment to rekindle your faith, to rekindle your walk with the Most High, and connect in where you can, because after all, the day of redemption draws nigh. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I pray this broadcast has been a barakah to you, and certainly an encouragement. Thanks again for joining us. Good night.